Momente mori. Remember that you will die. No matter what kind of you practice or what you preach, death's a part of life. And I think once you realize death, you grow in your religion more, and you grow culturally more, and you grow with others more, because you realize who you want to spend time with.
Welcome to A Place of Yes, a podcast about how I moved through my darkest hour. And for me, that was in channeling my grief into good. Welcome to the show. So I am here today with Maureen O'Brien and her son, Gabe Donovan. This kind of came about in a different way than most of our guests have come about. My producer, Christine, saw Maureen speak at a Double H event, and she came back so enthusiastic and was like, you have to meet this person. These are going to be a great fit for the show. It totally fits the Place of Yes vibe. And I was like, okay, cool. Lo and behold, it turns out, Maureen, that we have known each other since elementary school. We went to Holy Names together. It was one of those ways in which the world is small, and it can sometimes feel so big, but I love when this happens. So it turns out not only did we know each other from growing up and from Holy Names, but we knew each other from sharing some experiences also, from raising a child with medically complex lives. And then all of a sudden, and that's Gabe, and then all of a sudden kind of to come back together after all of these years and reconnect just seems pretty special. So I'm glad that we were able to do this. So thank you both for being here.
Cool, thank you.
Happy to be here.
So can both of you kind of talk a little bit about your journey, about how, like your story?
So I was born with a life-threatening genetic condition called neurofibromatosis type 1, or NF1 for short. I was diagnosed at 6 months old. And my first brain tumor, I was diagnosed on my first day of kindergarten. She got the call right when she dropped me off.
So did you know prior, like did you know at birth that there was something, or was it, like how did that come to be at 6 months?
So he presented with birthmarks. They're called, really scientific name, cafe au lait spots.
The cafe au laits,
And they were all over his legs, and I took him to the pediatrician, and I said, this just seems like a lot of really big freckles. Is it something we have to get looked at? And the pediatrician said, I've seen it only one other time. There's a rare neurological disorder called NF, and I think we need you to go to a neurology team and have a consult. It started a life with specialists, with doctors. It became, when he was little, our medical life was much more, it's still complex, but when he was little...
It was super complex.
It was super complex. It's not something where you can pick up the phone and call a specialist. The specialists are in Boston or Washington. You're traveling.
And your local pediatrician is more of a conduit of information, not really the one.
Correct.
Well, then, when I was really little, we had teams for everywhere the tumors were affecting places. So we had a stomach team, an eye team, a speech team.
You had a...
OTPT.
Yep. And then we had a oncology team because he did chemotherapy for an extended
because of the
period of time.
tumors?
Yes.
So was there ever, are the tumors benign?
Yes.
Okay, so they are loaded questions.
Yes and no. So when I was doing chemotherapy, there was a tumor in my optic chiasm. Basically, it was growing so much to a rate where I would go blind.
Okay.
So we did chemotherapy to prevent that. My tumors are still in there affecting stuff. Like, I'm still not the most graceful individual.
Dancing is hard, riding a bike,
Well,
that kind of stuff.
I got no rhythm.
Yeah.
So the
You can blame that on your parents, though, really, if you wanted to.
The tumors aren't... The dancing's maybe more nurture than nature. But, both affect it. So they still do stuff. Like, I don't have perfect vision. And there's other studies that we have about, like, some of my other things could have happened because of the tumors, like autism or ADHD. Or some people have shown that, like, there were a PTSD response to chemotherapy.
Yeah. Like the autism and the, okay. So there's not, that was going to be my next question. Is there a correlation between the NF1 diagnosis and like an increase in autism or ADHD?
Yes.
Like is that often?
So there's often, many times there are learning disabilities. So there's
and that's
hundreds.
because of the tumors.
Because of tumors, but also because of NF. So there's a correlation. The team that Gabe was with forever in Washington, who we loved, our doctor there we had for 14 years, and just as he turned 20, we're now switching to an adult practitioner. So we were really sad to say goodbye to Dr. Packer. But what they did at Children's National in Washington, which we could not find anyplace else, and why we traveled to Washington, is they had a neuropsychologist that was part of the team there in the NIH clinic. And she really helped us figure out exactly what he needed to be successful academically. When we left our final meeting with Dr. Packer just this past June, he said to Gabe, make me a promise that I get an invitation to graduation. I don't get a lot of patients that go this far. What they did for us there was monumental because we were able to really pinpoint some of his pain points in learning. Gabe's can I brag about you?
I love it when you brag.
So Gabe is a presidential scholar at Villanova University. He's
Incredible.
on a 4-year academic scholarship. They have
Holy cow. You must be so proud.
Well, there's
both of you.
So I applied for it and I got to be a finalist. Usually you go to the college when you're a finalist and you toured the college for 3 days, but that was the COVID time, so it was all through Zoom. And I do it and I get alternate status. And I remember I got the email that I got it, I think it was April 30th. And for anyone that's doing college applications now or knows about that things, almost every college you have to basically accept or decline by May 1st.
Decision day.
May 1st.
Yep.
I got the email in Mr. Matthew Agan's third period political science class.
You remember exactly where you were.
I was sitting next to our head of the ROTC department, John O'Keefe, in this class. I don't know why I remember any of this, but I do. And I get it, and my hands are trembling. So I raise my hand, and I'm like, Mr. Agan, can I go call my mom?
Oh, I love that.
And then I scurry to the main office, and I call her. And she knows that at high school, I never call her unless something's happening. And she's on a Zoom meeting for work. And I call her, and I'm like, Mom, I got it.
That's incredible.
And all the people on my Zoom meeting, so I start to cry and I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. So, and then I come back to my Zoom meeting completely not even paying attention.
Yeah.
I was on a Zoom meeting and all of my coworkers are now crying on the Zoom meeting. They're like, did he get the whole scholarship? I'm like, he got the whole scholarship.
And it's crazy because it's food, it's housing, it's books. I get all my books for free.
That is so awesome. And I want to pivot a little bit because I go back to what your doctor originally said, Dr. Packer?
Yeah.
About, going to graduation. And when you said that, Maureen, I got a little bit of like chills, just because I was like, so my son, Jake, very different situation, but similar in the sense of being young, having a really rare, a challenging medical life. And I've said this to a few other parents, and I'm going to say it now, and I always feel a little weird saying it. He never got a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And I'm always a little bit jealous. When you guys are sitting here talking about, you found out at 6 months, NF1, because then it's I feel like you can attack it, right? You can figure out where the Dr. Packers of the world are and what you can do. I don't love that this was, that you have this illness, but I love that you were able to handle it. And I just think that is such I don't want to say gift, but it's just such a...
Oh, it's a gift.
It's a gift, right?
It's
it's
a
this
gift.
unique perspective to take something that could go in so many different directions. And when I sit here with the two of you, it's so great. It's just so great. I just have met you, but I'm already, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of what you've overcome. I'm so proud of where you are. And presidential scholarship, it's just amazing. To pivot off that, can you talk a little bit, and maybe this is more of a mom question than a Gabe question, but I'm open to both. What did getting that diagnosis, what was that process for you?
I always say I'm really lucky because I got it when I was a kid. Because a lot of the time you see these people who are dealing with this life-threatening illness in a time in their lives where they can remember the time where they didn't have it.
And you don't know life out without it.
Yeah. So, for example, if you're get a cancer diagnosis, you're figuring out hey, I can't do this club or activity I love. The longer it takes to realize that you are different, the harder the fall is.
But I think your point is valid. And in this world of rare disease and of grief and of all of that, there's always steps, right? And I do think it's always important to sort of know where you... to appreciate what you can appreciate, because there's always something, right?
So when Gabe remembers exactly where he was when he got his presidential scholarship. I remember exactly where I was when his first brain tumor diagnosis happened. And I had dropped him off at school. He was going to School 19 in Albany. I was dressed to go to a business meeting. I had something for work, and my phone rang. What had happened was he had presented with chest hair at 5. So I called the pediatrician, and she said, okay, so there's something going on in the pituitary. That doesn't happen. So there's something going on with his hormone levels. Let's go get a CAT really quick so we can just see if there's anything there. There was a big one there in his hypothalamus, in the optic chiasm that he mentioned. And I had just, within a year before that, my brother had died of brain cancer.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
So when I got this diagnosis, that's immediately
right where you went.
That's right where you go. And I was dressed in a suit, and I just remember sitting on the porch of the school, the steps of the school. It was soaking wet. It had rained, and I didn't really care. And I just sat there and cried on the front porch of the school. We went then to the doctor, and then we went and got a specialist, and then we started a process. And
it's like almost like you make a list, right?
You make
a
list.
And you check it off.
Yeah, and you just kind of plow through it, and you are a lot more deliberate about how you live, who you interact with, what you spend your time on. You know, I've said this before. I never wanted him to have the difficulty he had in life with this disease. So you never want that. But it gives you a level of liberation. You just say no to certain things that aren't perfect.
Well, even like going back to that, you know, I always talk to my mom about like, you know, our relationship, and, you know, I'm very introspective, and like I'm thinking like, well, this person does this, and so why do they do that and I don't do that?
Do
And
you
I
remember
think,
thinking that way as a kid, or now more as an adult looking back?
I've probably always thought that way as a kid. I've been taking like humanities classes. That's one of my majors, which I adore, and it's helped me how to think through these things. So it's given me like kind of the vocabulary. And like one thing we've came down to is when I was sick, like really sick, and there were people in our lives that weren't being nice.
Yep.
We learned, can I curse here? Or
You can.
we kind of learned how to say fuck off.
It's one of my most favorite things to say.
Do I want to say a little too much? Sometimes. I'll take that on me. But I think one of the really great things about what happened is we learned that, like, hey, if something's not fun, why do it?
You appreciate the moments. You control everything you can control. That's one of the things that I sort of took away from being Jake's mom. And Jake's been gone 13 years now. So it's a lesson that I think I've always carried with me, right? And it's funny because we talked about this before. This is called the place of yes. But sometimes in order to come from this place of yes, what you need to say is no. You need to sometimes say no in order to protect your yes, so that your yeses are really what they are about.
There's a lot of no that happens automatically to an individual with a disability or a rare disease. So
Absolutely.
There were no sports because
Yep.
there wasn't that graceful coordination.
Did you feel like growing up that you had, like, you were like, why can't I do that? I want to do that. Like, did it make you mad, or did you?
So yes and no. My anger always comes from realizing it's not my world. I loved my all-boys high school, but when they talked about sports, I realized, and then I can't contribute. I was the manager of my varsity basketball team. I wish I loved every minute of it.
But you recognized there was a world happening that you couldn't actively participate in.
Yeah, but on the good side, it taught me what to care about. It was the kind of very weird thing where you know you're not part of their world. When you grow up, there's no yearning for it. Like when I was little, I think I yearned for it. Like
you saw what you were missing and
It was very
wanted to.
Little Mermaid. It was very that whole thing. But I think now, like, you still know they're not, like, it's not your thing, but
Yeah, but you also have different things. So as
Well, I was going to say you learn what your things are
Yeah.
sometimes
learned
too
what
as
they
you get
are.
older.
Yeah, and you're very engaged in Double H. You're very engaged in the Disability Services Club, the student-run club at Villanova.
So one thing I wanted to touch on, we sort of skirted around it a little bit, but one of the things, so I read your mom's speech when she was at that event for Double H where Christine met
I
her.
did not.
Well, I'm going to give you a little nugget of it.
Well, thank you.
One of the things that she talked about was that at a young age, you sort of came to terms with your mortality. I want to talk a little bit more of that because that is this, it's sometimes I must feel like it's like an elephant in the room, right? Like it's one thing to live your life, but it's another thing to maybe think that your life is not going to be, say, potentially as long as your brother's or other things. And how do you balance that? If you're comfortable talking about it a little bit, I'm curious about what both of you think about that.
There's liberation in it. Momente mori. remember that you will die. I think when I was really young, and when you had this kind of idea of mortality, you realize a lot of the things people your age are doing is kind of stupid.
Amen.
You only have 24 hours in the day and you're using it on that. You know, I think I talk to people and I think no matter what kind of you practice or what you preach, death's a part of life. And I think once you realize death, you grow in your religion more and you grow culturally more and you grow with others more because you realize who you want to spend time with.
You grow faster, too.
Yeah,
So you were way more mature at a young age, which made you even more different.
Well, I was also mature because, you know, when you're doing chemotherapy, you're in and out of the classroom. And when we were doing chemo, we had to think we're the mystery guest. So instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to do chemo this week, my mom found someone that was with us the whole day.
Yeah.
So it was neighbors, it was family friends. And, you know.
Oh, the mystery guest came with you to chemo.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
we had a mystery guest for
Oh,
every
that's
chemo
so great.
day.
Almost all of them were adults. So I spent my time in the chemo ward playing poker with quarters, reading
Good
comic
lessons,
books.
important for college. Does it
Important.
probably, do you bring your poker skills to Villanova?
Well, we're not going to talk about what I do at college with my mom.
It was also, I think, the mortality piece. So I don't know if you remember this, but Gabe was really little. We were in the hospital. When he was on chemo, he struggled with neutropenia. So, like, your body just kind of gets irritated and really angry. And you would have to get, like, platelets or white blood cells or some types of transfusions. And so we were in the hospital one night, and we were laying in the hospital bed. And Gabe was, you were probably 7, if that 6.
Well, I did chemo first and second grade, right?
Yeah. So he said to me while we were in the bed, "Is this my time?" And I said, "No, it is not your time. We've got this under control. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease." And he said to me, "But you're going to tell me when it's my time, right? Like, we're not going to fake it." I said, "I'm going to tell you. I will tell you when it's your time."
Conversations that they don't prepare you for, right?
I know. They don't prepare you for them, but I don't know. We figured it out.
I think faith also helps with that stuff, too. I think it helped me grow in my faith. I remember talking to a friend in college. I think, you know, I think someone was sick in their family, and I said, well, you know, I'm sorry. We were both religious people, so, you know, heaven's a great place. Like,
Yep.
I kind of got uncomfortable, and, like, you know, through the work, like, I realized, like, you know, even at my, like, disability, but, like, I know people that still have all sorts of grandparents.
Yeah.
And they haven't experienced death yet.
Yep.
Which is a very weird thing.
In experiencing death, you understand it more. When you experience rare disease, you understand death more.
Yeah.
And
You're
you don't
forced to think about some of the things
Correct.
that people have not yet had to. You come up against people who are just having very different journeys, you know,
Yeah.
and it is interesting though. Like you know, talking about faith, like I have a very, my faith like waxes and wanes, right? Like I'm not very consistent, but I have these moments. And one of my moments in life where I really came running back to my Catholic faith and really embraced it was after Jake died. I can 100% say that like I needed that. And I was so grateful to have it because I'm not sure that I could have gotten through it without it. I like what you said, you know, I think that's a really healthy outlook of like heaven's a great place. I think it's a good thing to help guide you if it applies to people. So one of the next things I want to touch on is, and we've alluded to it a little bit, but it's double H.
Yeah.
I want to talk about it on a couple of different levels. One is because, you know, I've referenced Jake's Help from Heaven. So many of our families have raved about their experiences and have talked about really it's like the highlight of their year. I want to talk to you really specifically because you were a camper and now you're a counselor.
Yes.
And Maureen, you were on the board, I believe, for quite some time. So
yeah.
you guys are really entwined in it. And when I was getting ready for this interview, I was thinking about I've had one other interview in A Place of Yes that had the parent and the child. And it was Sean and Seamus Evans. And I don't know if you are familiar with them.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
know who they are.
So
Yeah.
I have a little, so I was wondering if you knew them. So Seamus is about to, it's reminding me a lot of this interview. Like he really was his own advocate and speaker and Sean certainly said stuff, but Seamus held his own. Like, and Seamus is starting UAlbany honors college in
Nice.
September. But we were talking a lot about the running, because how can you not with the two of them? I mean, it's wild. But I don't know if you know this part of their story, but they ran across the country. They averaged like over 50 miles, 60 plus days in a row. But one of the things, and how this all comes back to Double H, they were doing this big summer trip, but it had to be around Seamus's week of Double H.
Yeah.
Like they were doing all of this stuff, but really, regardless of that, it was like, Dad, run faster. I have Double H.
Yep.
So I think that just speaks volumes for what a special place this is. And I think when we were talking earlier, you used the word magical. But can you talk a little bit, can you share your experience and what makes Double H just so magical? Do we have enough time?
It's transformative. It made me the person I am today. Like, it teaches you that you're not alone. I don't want to say like I was in a dark place when I was a kid, but I think like Double H was our safe spot, our safe wall.
You needed people.
Yeah.
Your people,
your
right? You got to
people.
find your people.
And we had to find them.
And as a mom, that's hard, right? When it's you do anything to help your kid find their people.
Correct. And you want your child to be happy. You want your child to be treated kindly. And in the early days, there was a lot going on for him, and he was really different. He was different than people we were related to. He was different. It was hard.
Sometimes I think the people it's harder than the people you don't know.
Oh my gosh, it's so much harder with the people you know.
And I think going back to kind of like choosing who to be around, like Double H is one of the things where I'm very much a fan of water is better than blood sometimes. There are people there that have known me and known me better than some people I'm actually related to. The great part of Double H is it gave me the first person I ever met with NF, Michael Gully, which is a huge change in my life.
So so you met someone who has your same diagnosis?
It was a family ski weekend. Our moms pulled right next up to each other. We started talking, and
like on purpose, or just the way life is?
Completely the way life is.
That's awesome. Those are my favorite moments.
We became great friends. He was a little bit older than me.
He was older.
A good 5-8 years, right?
Yep.
Okay.
But then sadly, he passed away in 2014. It was devastating because, like, I think, I always knew my own mortality, but this person had NF. And his NF led to cancer. And that's usually how it happens. And I was talking to my mom, and we were like, well, I did chemo. We have a Make-A-Wish. And so we used my Make-A-Wish to give back Double H, and we renovated the barn in his honor.
So forever, there's a sign on the barn at Double H that says, in honor of NF hero, Michael Gully.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's really nice.
I mean, that is...
The parents' one caveat was my name had to be on it.
On the side, inspired by Gabe Donovan.
Which was a big point of contention, if I remember.
Because did you not want it?
Oh, I did not want my name on it.
So Double H was this place where we could go. You didn't really have to think about what your health issue was. You could do everything that you couldn't do at another camp.
It was our place of yes. So Double H's whole thing is safe fun. And Paul Newman and Charlie, when they founded it, their whole purpose of camp were these kids can come and, to quote Paul Newman, raise a little hell.
You are describing very typical camp experiences.
Correct.
And this idea that children who have, so sometimes it's disabilities, right? Sometimes it's really challenging. Like some of the Jake's kids that go are on ventilators. They're on, they are hooked up to equipment that is life or death. And yet every camper,
we get them in the pool, we get them in the zip line.
And it's just, it gives me chills. And I think I said this before. Jake passed away when he was 4, so it wasn't in his cards. But when I hear these things, it always brings tears to my eyes because I was like, I wonder, if he was still alive, he could have skied. Maybe he could have ziplined. Like I see these things and I see kids like my Jake, like that sick, that confined to a wheelchair, that level of physical and mental and just disability, they still can have fun at Double H. And to me, that's just, there's not many places like that.
Yeah.
There might not be any other place like that.
Yeah, but as a counselor, it's weird. You look at the different things. The things that I get really emotional about is when the kid remembers you and you remember them. It's when the kid that last year was too scared to get on stage for the talent show gets up and sings a song. It's the kids that were bullied in school last year, and now they're coming back so confident and happy that they have friends. It's the kids that you see have growth spurts. It's the kids that you see who last year were in their chair all week and now they're walking around. It's the change, because as parents you see the gradual progression. But now as a camp counselor, I see just the change. It's the new kid. And it's so fun. It's my third year as a camp counselor, and there are some kids that I've had all 3 years I've been a camp counselor. And seeing them go from 6 to 8 is mind-blowing.
So talk a little bit just for anybody who might be listening who doesn't actually, like we're talking so much because we know Double
Yeah.
H so closely and it's in our backyard and we're so blessed to have it so close. But for those who might be listening who don't know, and you referenced that it was Paul Newman and Charles
Yeah.
Wood, but like
Yeah.
go into the
So
the
Double
nitty-gritty.
H is a skilled camp, especially for kids with life-threatening illnesses. So it's a sleepaway camp, and they can go there and have basically the camp experience.
And it's fully medically staffed.
It's fully medical staffed. Each cabin has a nurse, and there are other nurses in all around. And there's a doctor there. They're all volunteers.
And do they come from everywhere?
Or
are they mostly local,
So
or-
I would say we have a huge partnership with Albany Med, which is where we get most people. But we get them from all over.
So what happens is when a kid goes there and they have a deep medical condition, they're fully taken care of. So there's a place on site called the Body Shop. So if a child has an issue or needs a treatment or an infusion, there's a medical team that can do it right there. What I always used to say, we used to bring people to introduce them to camp when we would drop Gabe off. And it's funny, like you come through the gates and all of the guests we would take with us to come and see camp would think it was a regular camp until you got to the place where they weighed your child.
Okay.
And then you sat down with the box of medications and you handed everything.
transferred them
with,
over.
with the
You
unit leader
transfer.
and the nurse. Siblings can come as well, and then the children of the medical volunteers also
Okay.
come for that week.
Okay, so you've got a mix.
A lot of times, the siblings without diagnoses are left in the dust. It's very interesting. Some siblings go, some don't, and it's for 2 reasons. One, it's the 1 week they have mom and dad to themselves,
Yep.
and moreover, they realize that this is my sibling's place.
And that was the way it was with your brothers.
And I say this kind of just because, Jake was always the sickest kid in the room. Would he have been able to go to camp?
Probably.
Like, that's just where I'm always like, I'm always
Yeah.
like, everyone but Jake. But no, I think that
no,
that's
I
not
think
the.
so.
Everybody can go.
How I understand it, yeah.
I think you used the word magic. And it just, it's staying with me because it really is such a special
It
place.
really is.
And
Have you gone and visited?
I have been up there. I used to do years ago in Saratoga. There was, now I can't remember what they're called. Was it the Partners?
Yeah.
You gotta go. No, you gotta
There,
go. in the
so I would do I would do a lot of the fundraising through that. I just knew a lot of people
Yeah.
who did fundraising.
You
with
gotta
that.
go when the kids are there.
I have
Because
never been when the kids are there, so
you
that
will
is-
never get the full experience if the kids aren't there.
All right, Gabe, we're taking her for a tour.
Take me on a tour.
Yeah,
I would
next
love
summer.
it.
Yeah, and Jake could have totally gone. When I go and see Ventilator Week, Camp Inspiration,
Yep.
where it's children who are connected to ventilators on the zip line and in the pool, they figure out how to do it.
And it's awesome. And as you said that, I remember there's another little boy that's a Jake's kid. His name is AJ, and he is hooked up to
AJ Ballard?
Yes.
He's my camper.
Oh, stop it! Oh
So
my
Gabe
God.
had AJ
I was
2
there with
years
his
in a
family,
row.
yeah.
So
The Ballards,
I know
yeah.
Ryan and Jennifer,
Yeah.
longtime Jake's
Miss
family,
Bree?
longtime Jake's family, and I just when you said ventilator, that's what I was thinking of.
No, yeah, I've been paired with him 2 years in a row.
Oh, are you going to see him now, or have you already?
Oh, I already saw him. It's
Okay.
the first week.
Oh,
So
that's
it's then,
so
then it's,
awesome.
it's Camp Inspiration, then the 6 traditional weeks of camp, then alumni. So
Small world.
I've been paired twice now with Team AJ.
And you can see, especially like with the Ballards, right? Like
Yes.
that's a dynamic.
And I think they also look at it, what's different is it's the whole person.
Yeah.
So like every place else that some kids go to, it is what defines them first is the disability or
autism
the
camp or
illness.
something. Yeah.
It's also the medical model of disability. I'm a disability studies minor. The medical model of disability is basically you see the disability before the person. And it's called the medical model, so you don't want to hate on it, but when you're between you and me, when I'm in a doctor's office, I want them to see the brain tumors first before what my favorite color is.
Of course.
Usually the doctors can't switch out of that
Yeah.
for the other things. The medical model basically says that it is your disability that disables you. The social model says it is society that disables you. Basically meaning that you're not disabled because you need a ramp or an elevator. You're disabled because not every building in the world has a ramp or an elevator. So at camp, none of these kids are really, I don't say disabled because every building has a ramp or elevator.
Yep.
Most of these kids, disability or their thing, we kind of already do at camp. like sickle cell. It's keep warm, keep hydrated. We're making these kids drink
It's
water
the norm
all the
instead
time.
of the
norm.
yeah. It's just the norm. All right, I'm gonna hold you to it. I want to tour camp. What an amazing place. I've always known it. Like I said, like I've known the work and stuff, but this conversation, and I just love that we made that connection with AJ.
It's so funny.
I almost didn't say anything, but I was like, oh, that's awesome. But I'm like, how many AJs could there be? Maybe he knows them. The last thing I wanted to touch on with you guys is, so the podcast, right? It's called The Place of Yes. And then our kind of tagline is channeling grief for good. And when I first started having these conversations, they were really these traditional grief, right? And I was very sort of stuck in like this one type of grief. There's so many kinds of grief. And honestly, once you start going down that rabbit hole of grief, there's like 15 different kinds. There's so many. But one of the things that I talk about a lot with guests is not just the grief of losing someone, but there's this whole idea that you can grieve the life you thought you were going to have.
And I think it's very different kind of grief when you have the ability in the choice. There's the kind of grief where you have, like, when you choose colleges, like you are saying yes to this one path, and then you're kind of thinking, well,
should I have?
There were these 6 other great schools I was accepted to. It's you're grieving a loss of a different future self. For us, especially in the beginning, there was the grief of being the kid that doesn't get invited to the birthday parties.
So that was more
Or
what I was
if I
thinking.
am, it's because the parents feel sorry. It's the kid with the broken leg and on chemo or with autism. But then as I kind of grew older, I realized when the parents had less say, that people are inviting me.
Correct. So once you got to a certain age, it was different. The early days, I do think it was chaotic, trying to figure out what he needed and when he needed it. I'm sure this is where you were with Jake. Like, you're kind of in this space where you're like,
Constant deer in headlights.
constant deer in
Everyone's
headlights.
telling you how to raise your kid.
You need to discipline him more.
You need to discipline him more.
Yeah,
Or-
everyone's got an opinion.
Or you shouldn't be doing these talks and these podcasts.
Yeah.
Or, he probably doesn't have autism or brain tumors.
It was, but what would happen is, like, once you wrap your head around, like, okay, this is what our life is going to be, and my job as a parent is to make it as stress-free as I can, get him the care that he needs, and then whatever else we're doing, we're going to have fun. Like, so, like, when we went to Washington, D.C. for 5 days for medical, and it was grueling. And then what we would do is go to a baseball game.
Go to a museum.
We would go to a museum.
I was obsessed with the Ben Stiller Night at the Museum movies.
It's funny. I don't think I've talked about this with many people, but Jake's doctors were all in Boston, and Ethan was small. So they were only 15 months apart. So we would go to Boston. Exactly, we said grueling days, right? Like you would try to see all your specialists over 1 or 2 days, but we always did something. Like whether it was even just like walking around Faneuil Hall, or whether it was like going to like Rainforest Cafe or some silly restaurant that Ethan wanted. You know what I mean? Like whatever that was, it wraps up a lot of what I have tried to do and have not always done well. But we talk about this, channeling your grief for good, choosing joy in a life that can be extra challenging.
Mm-hmm.
We have choices, right? And
Yep.
I feel like one of the things I've heard from you guys and that I love and that I think is so important is that you choose happiness. It's a lot of what we did with Jake, and we didn't do it intentionally because it's sort of just how you live your life sometimes. But then you start to see that not everyone does that. But
Yeah.
it is important, I think. I think when you're talking about, think about what we've talked about just over this last hour or whatever. We've talked about mortality. We've talked about being different. We've talked about kids not being nice. Like we've just talked about heavy things that you have to balance that sometimes with laughter and fun and sometimes inappropriate jokes.
It's the only thing you can control.
I think so. I've loved this conversation. I've enjoyed the laughter and Gabe, I've just met you today, but I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of what you are doing. Still going to go back to this presidential scholarship. Are you kidding me? That's amazing. I will wrap up with this one piece that we do sometimes, and sometimes it puts people on the spot. So we end this portion of the show with this Ask Heather Anything. Mm-hmm. So do either of you have any Ask Heather Anything questions?
I do. I have one. Do you think about Jake every day?
That's a great one. I do think about Jake every day. I don't know if it's irrational or what it is, this like compulsive fear that the day will come when I don't. I get very scared of that, right? And there have been moments when, like, in the beginning when he passed, I was like very structured. Like, you know, I would, before Ethan went to school, we would go see Jake in the morning. I'd drop him off at school. Like when we'd be home from whatever activity he had, whether it was Taekwondo or whatever, we would swing by and say goodnight to Jake. Like I saw him twice a day at least for years. I just couldn't imagine my little boy being alone. You know, it just was this thing. And as time passed, you know, and Ethan got older and life sort of changes and frankly, life goes on, I didn't go every day. Maybe it'd be once a day. And I struggle with that sometimes. Like I brought him a huge thing of flowers the other day because it had been like 6 or 7 days since I'd been there and the flowers were dead. And I just like, I kind of beat myself up over it. I do make a point of thinking of him every day and of not every day, but most days, like talking to him. And I do this thing where I kind of talk out loud to him. It's kind of funny. Like I'm either talking to the cat, myself, or Jake.
Do you get a sign from him ever?
I didn't know that cardinals were a thing. I legitimately had no idea. When he first passed, I was kind of at a loss with what to do with myself because Ethan was in kindergarten, so he was in school. Jake was my 24/7 care, really. Like, you know, it was just, I had this time I didn't know what to do with, and I started running, and I was sort of compulsive at the time about just running a lot. And a few days I'd be like running, and I was like, this damn cardinal is like following me. And I came home one day, and I was like, Brian, I think I'm being like stalked by a cardinal. So then it became a thing. Like we would see him at the cemetery or like in our backyard, there's these cardinals that fly around. And then we'd be like, hey, Jake. So we just started calling him Jake. And then time had passed, like months and months and months. And someone was like, you do know that the cardinal's Jake, right? And I was like, well, I know the cardinal's Jake. How do you know the cardinal's Jake? Like I was kind of like, and they were like, no, it's a thing. Like when you see a cardinal. And then it made it so special. So we still rely on, like, any of us sees a cardinal, it's Jake. We kind of started talking about like the small world, and we can end with that because I do feel these big topics,
I got a
big
question,
ideas.
don't
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm scared of your question though. All right. Should I be nervous?
No. So you're saying how you want to come to camp, and there's volunteers who can volunteer a week in the summer. Would you want to be with the age group and like the young boys that Jake would have been with?
That's a good question.
Or would you want to be with something completely different?
That's an excellent question. And to be honest, I have no idea. There's part of me that would want to be like kind of what Jake would have been. Like I'd want to probably be like ventilator week. You know what I mean? Because that world, I know. Like I know that world.
I would always rather have a parent volunteer than a teacher volunteer. But I think the mom and the dad volunteers just have a different vibe for it.
It has been such a pleasure talking to you both. Gabe, I hope you have a wonderful final session of camp, and I wish you all the luck in Villanova.
Thank you.
And Maureen, this has been so great catching up.
It's good to see you.
It's so nice to see you. Thank you for listening to A Place of Yes. Please follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend, anybody who might benefit from listening to this. It would make a world of difference if we could just reach more people and share the work that we do and the stories we want to tell. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, leave us a thumbs up or leave us a comment. We would appreciate all that you can do. If you really like this episode, please share it with a friend or two.